Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Music Wise. I'm Donato Cabrera, Music Director of the Las Vegas Philharmonic and the California Symphony. And today I am so honored to have someone who I've been wanting to talk with really in depth for so long. And we're so often in the same building, but he has an incredible job to undertake, and so do I. And we often meet backstage right as I walk out on to conduct a concert, or during intermission, a quick hello there, or a quick, great job there. And so now we finally, for better and for worse, we have time on our hands to talk to one another. And so I'd love for you all to help me welcome Myron Martin.
Hi, Maestro. So happy to be here with you today.
I'm so glad you have had the time to join us this afternoon. I feel sort of neglectful in not having seen along the way this really important fact that, and this is the reason why I reached out to you a couple of weeks ago, that it said somewhere in one of the recent, press things that you had studied voice. And this was what your degree was, undergraduate degree was in. And I thought, oh my gosh, how could we not have had this time together, this 6 years, and not just, stole away to some, quiet corner of a, restaurant or bar and just talk about a shop in music. And so that's why I reached out, and this show that I started during these times has really been a wonderful chance for me and for the what I think my guests to just sort of talk about our journey to where we are now and how it relates to what we do. And in the case of you're now CEO and president of the Smith Center, and which is such an incredible institution and has so many components. And it may seem for some a big leap from an undergraduate degree in music, but I know, and that the discipline of being a musician actually sets you up quite well for a position that you have today. And so I want to talk about that journey from that moment, from your beginnings of and why you got into music and how you got to where you are today and what it means to be an artistic director. So, okay, Myron, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Houston, Texas. My father was a petroleum geologist, and when I was 10 years old, he came home with a Hammond organ because he worked really hard, and he was a really serious guy. And some friends of his said, you don't play golf, you don't have a boat, you need to figure out something to relax with. And he picked a Hammond organ. And
little did he know.
Little did he know. And I took to it, and that's kind of my first introduction to music, really.
Did you as a family, or did you catch him listening to the radio, listening to music? Was music part of his life before the instrument was purchased?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, even before then, so I don't know, I may have been 8 years old. I remember him taking me to see Lionel Hampton, vibraphonist in a jazz club in Houston. I was a little kid. How he got me in there, I have no idea. But I still have these vivid images of live music. And so many other times that he would take me to hear music, and of course he played around the house. It was an important part of my growing up.
So you started taking lessons and he did as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you guys were sort of fighting for time on the organ every week to practice for the lessons, I take it.
for the lessons and beyond. I mean, I remember there were days that I probably spent 12 or 14 hours on that bench just because, I loved it so much.
So by the time you got to middle school or high school, did you start taking music as an elective, choir or band or orchestra? What was that like?
Yeah, so music was in my blood. In junior high started in the choir, and as a matter of fact, between my 7th and 8th grade in junior high choir, we were selected to be ambassadors for the United States. And we did a 3-week tour, a singing tour of Romania and Czechoslovakia.
Whoa! Behind the Iron Curtain.
Behind the Iron Curtain, greeted by soldiers with machine guns, but we loved every moment of it. And again, just a memory I'll never forget.
I think it's important to mention, and it's still the case today, to this day, and you can talk about this more than I can, that Texas, the state of Texas, is known throughout the country for its music education programs. The high school music education is really, I mean, you go to Houston, Dallas, throughout the state, and these districts have these incredible band programs, incredible choir programs, orchestra programs that sort of feed into the conservatories around the country still to this day. Was that the case with your school?
It was, and while we're talking about schools, I have to tell you, Donato, that I've spent a lot of time here in this dark period of coronavirus, kind of listening to the debate about what we should do with our school kids in our school district for the next semester and the next academic year, and some of the choices that may get made just in an effort to get through this terrible time may lead to less experience with band, orchestra, and choir and theater programs. And I'm not here today to advocate for anything, because I think the Clark County School District's doing a really great job of figuring it out. But I worry that some kids go to school because of band or orchestra. Some kids stay in school because of their love for the choir or for the theater, and I don't want to see those programs go away. Our school district here in Las Vegas does a good job with all of those things. But if we go to a 4-class schedule for high school, it means that some of these programs may suffer. And so it's important that you and I, as advocates for the arts, make sure that our parents and our friends know that this is what's happening behind the scenes. And it could be a tough year for the very things that you're saying were my motivating factors growing up. I want the same thing for our kids.
And I'm specifically a product of Nevada's state music education programs, starting here in Las Vegas, and then in Washoe County, the school district. Both school districts still to this day have incredibly important and prominent music education programs that we almost take for granted. And believe me, coming from having lived in the Bay Area and then before that New York City, I can tell you firsthand that our music education programs here in Clark County and elsewhere in the state can compete at that level around the country, and often are far superior. And so you're absolutely right. And I think I can't imagine not having had music when I was in middle school. It's what kept me engaged. Yes. And I think it was the same for you.
The same for me. Yeah, and I look at some of these teachers that we have. The Smith Center does an annual award show for public school teachers called the Heart of Education Awards. And this isn't about arts teachers. This is about all kinds of teachers. And we've honored coaches and ROTC directors and all kinds of people. But as you read the applications and as you are looking for those teachers who go above and beyond, it's easy to see how music, theater, band, orchestra, choir, these teachers really do make a difference in people's lives, and they go above and beyond every single day. So now's a perfect time for us to thank them for the work that they do, and for all of us to know that we're going to get through this this pandemic, and one day we're going to get to a place where, people in the choir can actually sing again, right? And woodwind players can play in a room with other musicians, and they don't have to be quarantined someplace, right?
Yes, without a doubt, that's going to happen. Was there that one teacher for you that kept you going? Was it that thought, I want to be like that? And who was that person?
Well, I will tell you, there was more than one. I had two, believe it or not, I had two junior high choir teachers.
Wow.
Yes, you're right. Texas really embraced the arts back in my day. And so Miss Hinkle and Miss Scandrette, Scandrette was only 8th grade. Those were the two teachers that saw to it that I was one of the 30 kids that got to go on this singing tour. And we did things like we produced Broadway musicals on a junior high stage, like fully produced costumes and sets, and we built the sets. So they certainly sent me on a path. And then Coloma Lafferty, my high school choir teacher, who we lost just a couple of years ago, was one of those dedicated human beings that I don't, other than her church life that we knew about, I don't know that she did much other than taking care of her choir students. We worked throughout the year, and we worked after school, and she had all the time in the world for us. And it was thanks to her that my first choral composition as a freshman at North Texas was premiered at my high school choir. So
you were also composing.
Oh gosh, I some might say decomposing.
But that's really special, because I can tell you from my background, my high school band director is still with us. He taught at Reed High School in Sparks, Nevada, and it was more than just band. It was the whole my whole life, and the community of friends emanated from those fellow students in the class in that class. In band, and he fostered that. It was this wonderful collection of young people that still to this day most of us are in touch with one another. I would assume it's the case with you, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. One of my dearest friends from junior high, from the choir trip to Romania and Czechoslovakia, is a very, very successful songwriter in Nashville, and has written lots of #1 songs for people like Reba McEntire and others. I look back at that group of people who are still making music today.
So you just mentioned North Texas, then North Texas State, now University of North Texas. So you were in Houston. Was that your goal? You wanted to go to North Texas State, or were there other places you were also interested in possibly going to?
No, I was open to lots of ideas, and back then I remember Berkeley was on my list, Indiana was on my list, but being a Texan, growing up in Houston, the idea of being able to drive, albeit 5 hours to school and all, was kind of appealing to me at the time. And I'll be honest, I couldn't have picked a better school for me at that time. The music school was extraordinary, still is today, and it was a small town, so there was that. but we weren't all that far away from Dallas and Fort Worth and the Metroplex. So we could do all those kind of big city things when we wanted to. And just because it popped into my head, I will let you know that while at North Texas, my music experience expanded. I played, I don't know if you know about my baseball history, but I actually played for the Texas Rangers baseball team.
You did?
Yeah, ask me what I played.
There has to be a catch there. What did you play, Myron?
Yeah, I played the organ.
So you were one of a couple of organists that would play for the games.
Yes. Yeah, I was the year and a half that I played, I was really the only organist. And I was a baseball fan, and again, by then I could drive from Denton to Arlington and play the game and drive back, no big deal. And I could bring a couple of friends because I had my own little box.
Right.
And I could feed them because, I had access to the press lounge. It was a really good thing to be in college and to be able to feed your friends.
So this is fascinating because, that is a very niche, as you know so well, that's such a niche, wonderful, and they're famous organists at certain ballparks. And it's sort of like your role is such a dramatic one because you can control sort of the engagement of the audience in the ballpark, get them going. If it's a little bit of a lull, the pitcher's having an issue, or the batter's up and he struck out the first time, you got to rile them up to, the leadoff hitter. Are there some particular games that you remember thinking that you had an active role in sort of engaging the team to do better?
Oh yeah, especially when you get into the playoffs, it's a big deal. And at that point, you're meeting with the network, the television network, and you're meeting with all kinds of people who are telling you what to do and what not to do, and when to do it and when not to do it. Everything's kind of on a particular cue. But yeah, listen, to be in college and to have that kind of experience was something that
you were big man. You were the big man on campus with that job. Wow.
Yeah, sure.
So North Texas State, it's particularly it is, as you say, first of all, just a wonderful school of music all around.
All right.
But it is particularly known around the world for its jazz program. And at that time, I would venture to say that the jazz band program at North Texas State was really the only place, if you wanted to have the top level experience of playing in a jazz band, the 1 o'clock jazz band at North Texas State, meaning the band that met right after lunch at 1 p.m. was, if you hear recordings throughout the time, from the 60s, 70s, 80s to today, there really isn't a professional jazz band that sounds any better. I mean, it's as good as it can get. And there are so many famous musicians who have been in that 1 o'clock jazz band. What was that like being at that school with that sort of international renown? We talked about this before the broadcast started. Stan Kenton, when he passed, his archives now are housed at North Texas State. All of his incredible arrangements are there. What was that like for you?
Well, it was a lot of things, the first word that pops into my head is humbling. In high school, I won all the talent shows, right? I won the citywide talent show. I thought I was a pretty good musician. And I got to North Texas, and on day one, I realized I wasn't so good, right? I mean, I was okay. And then the 1 o'clock lab band, I think the year before I started, won a Grammy Award. First university ensemble to win a Grammy like that. And I saw this guy, Lyle Mays, who was on that record, a piano player, uh, playing this music, and I watched him in absolute awe. And I realized a lot of things. I realized what good really was, and it was him, not me. And I also realized that his hands were like twice the size of mine. Like he could reach 13ths. I had to stretch to reach ninths. And my one realization was that I could never practice my way to bigger hands.
It's true.
Right. And in that case, it mattered.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I followed my music career. It was really important to me. But I also started having nightmares that I was 60 years old and playing the piano in a Holiday Inn lounge and never really making it. And that caused me to think about my childhood and kind of growing up. I was known as the neighborhood entrepreneur. I was always finding a way to sell you something. I would pick pine cones out of people's yards, take them home, sprinkle a little glue and glitter on them, take them back to the people I got them from, and sell them back. So I was always selling things, and so I as I kind of looked at my life at 19 years old or something, and realized that I would always be involved in music, but I would always know that there were a lot of people who were better musicians than I, and I had a hard time reconciling that, and so taking the musician in me and the entrepreneur in me, I decided to go back and get a second degree in business administration. Right
away? Did you? That I have to say that's not very common from people of that age, and it's no condemnation of a 19-year-old, 20-year-old for not having the that sort of self-reflection, the ability to self-reflect, because that's just not generally part of their makeup, and that's okay. But you had that, and I'm curious. You said it was difficult to reconcile, but at the same time, you still made that decision. Was it something that reconciliation that just happened, or did it take some years to sort of mend?
Yeah, it evolved. It evolved. Because listen, throughout it all, I still held out hope that I was good enough that I could certainly make a living as a musician. But no, so it evolved, and I graduated with my degree in music, and I immediately went to work for the Baldwin Piano Company, where I had been a demonstrator as a 14-year-old kid. They'd send me around different places to play little concerts, and so I had a relationship with them. And when I'm getting ready to graduate, they're the only company I called, and I said, I'm about to graduate, and I've always loved working for Baldwin, and I think I'd like to do that when I finish. And they said, well, done. We'll find a place for you. And they did. And the day I graduated, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and then a few other cities along the way. But and I didn't have my MBA at that point, but I already kind of blended the music and business together.
And so having the idea of, okay, I have these skills, I can sell things, I can make music, but then to decide to get an MBA, how did you? What was that decision? Where did you go? Did you feel like it was the right choice at the right time?
Yeah. So my career with Baldwin started in Atlanta. It went to Houston, then to Sacramento, and then to San Francisco, Chicago, New York. So those were my cities. And so when I'm in the Bay Area is when I made the decision to go back and get an MBA. And I went to the bosses at Baldwin and I said, I I think this would be good for the company, and therefore I think you should pay for it. And they laughed at me. And then the next day they paid for it.
Selling that pine cone.
So I had their support, which was terrific. I did the executive MBA program at Golden Gate University in San Francisco, right there on Mission Street. And what it meant was that we met every other Friday and Saturday, all day long, for 2 years. And our class stayed the same, but our professors changed along the way. Two different professors per day. And that's when this notion of music and business and music as a business really started to form with me. So my thesis and lots of my work through that period with 18 other people that we were together, like I say, for 2 years, all of whom were smarter than I was. These were top executives at Apple Computer and Kaiser Permanente and really the big industry in San Francisco. I learned a lot from them, and that's another group of people I've stayed in touch with, which I appreciate.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah,
Seems like another inflection point in your life that made a big change.
Yes. Yeah. And listen, they all enjoyed kind of my feedback because, I came from a very different place than most of them. And they loved talking about, music and the concert business and touring and things that weren't part of their everyday lives. So it worked out okay. And they elected me class president, and I saw us through the 2 years of classes and negotiated with the professors to make sure that we, were getting what we were after. And I really had a great experience there.
When you were living in San Francisco, do you remember any particular musical excursions that come to mind?
Oh my gosh! So first of all, I lived. You know this because you know the neighborhood probably better than I do. But I lived in a place called Opera Plaza.
Very well.
In Van Ness, just kind of across from the Opera House and 2 blocks down from Davies Symphony Hall. So those were my places to go and be inspired. And I didn't have to park. I didn't have to drive. Didn't have to park. Just walk.
Very important.
Exactly. In the city, that's important. So there were many experiences in those buildings. I mean, my first time in the War Memorial was for a ring cycle. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But everything and so many other experiences. Yoshi's Jazz Club was a place that I enjoyed, and you have to admit, San Francisco has something for everyone.
Certainly true. So where were you when the idea of Las Vegas, of moving to Las Vegas, the kernel of that idea, where were you at the time, and what was that brought you here?
So my longest time in any city with Baldwin was in New York, and I was there for about a decade. And I ran the concert and artist division, which meant that I managed the relationships with that 200 and some odd list of concert artists. I mean, back then it was Earl Wild.
Wow.
My favorite, Abby Simon, who passed away recently, who taught both at Juilliard and the University of Houston, a dear friend. And then jazz musicians, I had George Shearing, Dave Brubeck, Marion McPartland, and pop musicians, I had Billy Joel and Bruce Hornsby and all kinds of other people. So that was the life I was leading. I got to.
Myron, sorry to stop you just there, but there's a name that I think we should talk a little bit about, because he was so influential, and he was, for a variety of reasons, he sort of was under the radar of the Horowitzes and and that's Abby Simon. And as you just mentioned, he did pass away not all of that long ago. Lived in Switzerland, I believe, most of his life, and was a man who, I think, if you had a Reader's Digest subscription at one point, or were to have had ordered the 101 best classical piano classical, you would know and would have recordings of Abby Simon in your library, maybe not even knowing it. And in what was your, just briefly, what was your interaction with him? Because he is truly a very special and important American artist.
I have so many fond memories of time I spent with Abby. He was one of my closest friends during that time in New York. And at the time, while he always had the place in Switzerland, he always had a place in Houston, he always had a place in New York. And during that period, he was spending a good amount of time in New York. He had his studio at Juilliard was filled with concert pianists, and so he had a lot of work to do there. Oh my gosh! All right, so Abby is a guy. Here's my favorite memory of Abby Simon. He just played recital at Carnegie Hall. I go backstage, and his agent and I both walked in together. The door was still closed, but and there was a line of people wanting to say how great he was. But we went into the dressing room, and Abby comes out, and I said, "Abby, that was great." And he looked me in the eye, and he said, "Only great?"
That's good.
Right? That was Abby Simon. Because he was a perfectionist, and he was much better than great. He was an extraordinary musician.
I didn't know that you had that connection to Abby Simon. When I read the New York Times article about his passing, of course, the name was very familiar to me, and I had heard some recordings, but I went back and went through all of the recordings that were available, especially his Chopin. And they're just as good as it gets. And they're really beautiful recordings. I'll share some recordings on this comment.
Oh, good.
Oh, good. Really, yeah. Okay, sorry to interrupt. So you were in New York at the time.
Yeah, and while you're putting up recordings, we should put up some of Earl Wild's vast catalog. His romantic repertoire is unmatched in my.
And of all the pianists, when I think of Earl Wild, I think of ease. What's nearly impossible for almost everyone else, he just made it look like it was no problem.
Yes. He walked into. I don't know if I should tell. Yeah, he walked into my office one day, and without hello or without anything else, he walked in and he said, "Myron, what's the difference between a spruce and a fir?" I went, "I don't know. What's the difference between a spruce and a fir?" And he looked right at me and he said, "Well, this is a spruce and this is a fir." I don't know.
Knowing of Earl Wild, knowing him in the way he would do that would have been perfect. Perfect joke for him to tell. That's one. Okay, so
yes,
yeah. So you're in New York.
In New York, and really leading a pretty perfect life. I had no complaints whatsoever. And one of my clients previously had been Liberace, and I had been serving on the board of directors for the Liberace Foundation in Las Vegas. And after he passed, and after George, his brother, had passed away, and George's wife Dora was looking after the foundation that he created with his estate. When she started getting a little older, she said, "We need to bring someone in to run this place." And at a board meeting, someone said, "Yeah, we need to find someone like Myron." And that turned into, "We need to get Myron." And I said, "Wait, no, stop. I love serving on the board, but I love living in New York and being at the heart in the heart of the music business the way I am. I'm not moving to Las Vegas. And 2 weeks later, I started making plans to move to Las Vegas. And so I came here to run the Liberace Foundation for the Arts. Created scholarships all over the place, in all the great schools of music, but also places like the Fashion Institute of Technology, where we did a costuming scholarship because that was such a part of who he was. So that's what brought me to Las Vegas.
So the directive of the foundation was really one of providing scholarship money for the primary objective.
That's right. That's right.
And so you're now, what year? When was that? When did you come to Las Vegas?
1997.
1997. And what was your intent? Think to yourself. You think, okay, I'll give this a shot. I'll run this foundation. Did you say I'll be here for a couple of years and then move on to the next? Or did you not? Did you just have an open book?
Yeah, no, I had an open book, and I really had no preconceived. There wasn't a plan around, all right, I'm going to do this for 2 years and jump to something else.
Mm-hmm.
I came to do it, and I enjoyed it. And we grew the foundation, and we grew the number of scholarships we gave out, and we did all kinds of crazy things, like launched a line of Liberace stuff on the QVC channel on television, and so many of his CDs that we now owned outright and pressed ourselves, so we could sell those on QVC and make a pretty healthy profit. So no, I did it until UNLV called and said, we've been doing a search for someone to run our Performing Arts Center, and it's gone almost a year, and we're just not finding what we want, and we wonder if we couldn't entice you to come and do it, because we'd love to have you run our Performing Arts Center. And I said, no, I don't really think that's what I want to do next. But the first 2 years living in Las Vegas, the truth is, all I wanted to do was move back to New York. I missed music. I missed the whole scene in New York. And the thought that maybe I could help change Las Vegas by upping the cultural scene with Las Vegas's Performing Arts Center, Ham Hall at UNLV, actually became enticing to me. And so it wasn't long after that conversation that I made that change 4 years after moving to Las Vegas.
I think one of the things that across the board, when people move to Las Vegas, they may have a lot of preconceptions about what Las Vegas is. But when one starts living here and meeting the people that live here, the performers that are here full time, and the community that is sort of the ring around the Strip and the thing that people know of Las Vegas outside of Las Vegas, you realize there's a community here that is so welcoming, that is such so full of heart. And yes, New York, as I lived in New York City and also San Francisco, and those are wonderful places. There's no doubt about that. We all know that. But I think there's a sense of community here that is not as readily apparent in those other places. And you become one has the potential of making a big difference in a community like Las Vegas. So I have a feeling that during those 4 years of the Liberace, I think maybe so moving anywhere. When I moved to San Francisco from New York, I couldn't wait to move back to New York City, and that just so it's natural, right?
Yeah.
But I think over those course of 4 years, you would say that you started to become part of this incredible, lovely fabric.
Well, that's exactly right, and it's also true that this is a city where you can get things done. That if you're not kind of fifth generation wealth, like in some cities, you don't get noticed. Here, if you have a good idea and you're willing to put the work behind it, people will support you. And I loved the time at UNLV. We grew the program there and presented more and more concerts, and I brought the New York Philharmonic, I brought the Israel Phil, I brought some pretty good bands to town back then, and people like Gregory Hines, before he passed away, made his Las Vegas debut at Artemis Ham Hall. And I just love that we've been able to do some things like that along the way.
So at about, and I might have the timeline slightly off, but I had a wonderful lunch, extended lunch, as we all do with Don Snyder, not too long ago. And at about the same time that you moved to Las Vegas, there was this idea that was generating with a bunch of community leaders, one of them, about a performing arts center for the city. At what point did you become aware of this idea and get on that boat?
Very early on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Don and Dr. Keith Bowman and oh my gosh, Scott McTaggart, Nancy Housels. There was a core group of people who were exploring the idea of what a world-class performing arts center might mean in Las Vegas, because it wasn't defined. And so early kind of in those conversations, Don and Keith called and said, "You want to volunteer and come and help us?" And I said, "Of course." I was at UNLV at the time. Yeah, so this group has been on this ride for over 20 years now. Here in the 8th year of the Smith Center being open, you think 20 years, it means that there was at least a dozen years that we were at this before we opened the Smith Center. Yeah, I think back to those days, and everybody told us, that's a great idea, but it's not going to happen, or that, you guys are off on a really great mission, but don't ask me for money, right? I mean, there were 100 different variations of no that we were hearing back then. And I'm glad you got to have that lunch with Don, because in my mind, he's not only the single smartest guy in Las Vegas, but he knows how to get things done like nobody else. And he's willing to put not only his time and his effort, and I mean, he digs into these topics, but his money behind things that he believes in. And he and his wife, Dee, were the first $1 million donors to the Smith Center at a time when we had no idea if this thing would ever make it. And I think that says the world about him.
In the creation of a new space, be it a performing arts center or an opera house or a museum, it really is there are almost too many variables. Almost too many potential design, what needs to be in this, what needs to be in a performing arts center for Las Vegas. I can only imagine, and we could probably have 7 shows about how that evolved over the years, over those dozen years. What were some of the key moments that I'm thinking in my mind? First of all, sort of the Art Deco, that idea that, we need to have this thing that sort of represents the Art Deco of Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam. When did that happen? And we need a cabaret. We need, a black box. We need a large, a theater with a pit that can you can do an opera in. Those are sort of key moments in my mind, looking back now as someone who came in after it was opened. When did those happen along the way?
So let me back up just a little bit and say that the Smith Center is here today because of the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation. Talk about people who put their money where our mouths were. They stepped up in a big way. We owe them.
John told me that story of how that yes happened. That was a great story.
Yeah, and you're right. That's one episode alone just to tell that story. So we won't. But that was important. The city and the county and the state, all three had to get together in a way to help do their part. And there's this tax on rental cars for tourists who come into Las Vegas that helped to fund the initial funding of the Smith Center. So a lot of things happened. People voted for things unanimously, even in election years, because they knew how important this project was. So to get to your question about kind of architecture and programmatic elements of what do we need, we started by looking at a whole bunch of successful performing arts centers, kind of comparing what they had and what they didn't have. We started looking at architects who were responsible for some of the best. We hired the architect. We hired David M. Schwartz out of Washington, D.C., and with the architect and the acoustician, acoustics out of Connecticut, and our theater planners, Fisher Dax, we started taking trips. And we started at Carnegie Hall.
Who was we? Who was this group of people?
It was this group. It was the architect, the theater designer, and the acoustician. And then there was a small group of us as the owners, Don and I and Richard Plaster and a couple of others who went on the early trips to try to make sense of what the Smith Center really needed to be. We knew that Las Vegas was a town where we're willing to tear things down in 20 years and start over, right? That's the history of the Strip. We also knew that the greatest performing arts centers, be it concert halls or opera houses, were built over 100 years ago and still running successfully today. And so we wanted to unlock kind of the keys to their success. And so we went to Carnegie, and we went to Lincoln Center and Kennedy Center, and we went to Bass Hall and Fort Worth and the great places all over the country. And we went to La Scala and La Fenice, and I could make the long list of the important buildings that are still operating today in Europe, and learned from all of them. We spent a weekend just exploring Broadway theaters. And part of that exploration was me with a notebook and a tape measure measuring the sizes of seats, because you hear the complaints about,
right, that's so true.
Seats are so small. All right, let's measure a few. So we did. And so it was all of those trips and thousands of photographs and thousands of pages of notes that led us to the program, the elements of what the Smith Center would become. We knew that we needed a large hall, and some of our friends in the classical music world were advocating for something no larger than 1,800 seats, because the thinking back then was more than 1,800 seats, you run the risk of compromising acoustics. Then we had our Broadway partners, who we knew would be the 800-pound gorilla in terms of ticket sales, saying it can't be any smaller than 2,200 seats, because we can't make money on a show if you don't have at least that many, and we like much more than that. And ironically, we ended at 2,050, right in the middle. And with the help of acoustics and frankly, their insistence on some design elements to make sure that we had the acoustics that they promised us. When we started the project, I said to Paul Scarborough from Acoustics that we had to be at a level of Carnegie Hall or better. That's a tall for a brand new building.
And just to for people to know a little bit about a performing arts center has to sort of be good at many different things, and it's challenging to have a hall where an orchestra can play without any electronic aid to sound good, and then the next night to have a Broadway show where everyone potentially mic'd, that sort of those two things are entirely different concepts, and what might be good for one is a disaster for the other, and vice versa. And so to have a space like Reynolds Hall that is good, very good for both, is really a testament to what you're mentioning.
To quote Abby Simon, only good.
Very good. It's absolutely stunning for both.
Oh no, you're right though. I mean, the conventional wisdom 20 years ago is that a multi-purpose hall is a no-purpose hall. Mm-hmm. And then CAD design and lots of things in the world of acoustic design happened that allowed us to look at things a little differently. And when I say Paul Scarborough pushed, I was really, really advocating for the luxurious feel of a padded carpeting in the boxes on the box tier. Well, why not give the nice people a little luxury when they're in their box? And Paul Scarborough finally, and after weeks of conversation and kind of arm wrestling with him, he finally looked me in the eye and he said, I can give you carpet. He said, but I can no longer promise you Carnegie Hall or better. And when he put it in those terms, I didn't want carpet anymore, right? Yeah. And we ended up designing this beautiful terrazzo that has texture and color that people love. And terrazzo is going to last for as long as the building lasts, which we liked as well. And it gave Paul that tiny little bit of extra reflectivity in those boxes that allowed him to be able to measure the acoustics that you, Maestro, care about.
Tell me a little bit about how the idea of the Art Deco influence happened, because I'm sure you had multiple design possibilities.
David Schwartz is hired as our architect. He calls me and he says, we architects like to start our design process by looking at context. And architects, when they say context, what they mean is, I want to look at the buildings that surround your building.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. And so I said, well, listen, come on out and I'm going to drive you around. But there are no buildings around our building. The Lou Ruvo Center was in process. The World Market Center was just kind of across the street. There was a railroad track along one side. Is knock yourself out. Well, David teaches architecture at Yale. He's a really smart guy, and so he pulled back from it. He studied it. He had some of his students study it, and he came back to us and he said, Las Vegas became a city when the Hoover Dam was built. And during that period of time, this kind of masculine Art Deco was in vogue. And some of the most important buildings built in America during that period were Art Deco. He said, I want to use that as our inspiration. I want to use the dam as our inspiration to start this design. And he said, now, Las Vegas has a lot of faux buildings. You have an Eiffel Tower and you have a Sphinx and you have all of these places, including, a little portion of the exterior of the Palais Garnier, the Paris Opera House.
That's right.
Right. He said, so we can't do any of that. Right. We're not using acoustical foam. We're using real materials. And while we're going to start with Art Deco, we're going to update it in a way that makes it contemporary, not meaning modern, but right for today. Meaning, yeah, we want some windows, maybe a little more than they would have back in the 30s. And we want some other amenities. And that was his takeoff. That's how we started this architectural treatment, was by being inspired by the dam.
I think it's the stroke of genius. It's one of the things that when I started coming back and hearing, I heard from Yuzhao Wang, by the way. I don't know if I've ever told the story. She had come here as a soloist with, I believe, Israel Philharmonic or perhaps Cleveland. Israel.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yes.
And the following week, she was a guest at the San Francisco Symphony, and she was the one who told me about the fact that she had heard that the Las Vegas Philharmonic was looking for a new music director, et cetera, et cetera. And so I went on to the website, Smith Center website, and I saw this obvious ode to the Hoover Dam, and it really spoke to my heart that was brought back, because from my initial memories of Las Vegas as a child going to Hoover Dam are so strong. So it really is such a lovely touch. Just have to let you know that from a personal point of view.
Thank you.
So aside from why we're talking virtually in the moment we're in today, over the years, what has the Smith Center, has it fulfilled your vision? Are there things that you are looking forward in the future that you haven't been able to achieve just yet, or part of this plan? How does the Smith Center relate to you now, and what's your vision for it?
So when we were dreaming about the Smith Center, we dreamt really big, right? I mean, what you see today is a building clad in limestone. The seats are covered in mohair fabric, and one day we can talk about how that came about. It is built like those buildings that inspired us, that have been around for over 100 years, because we built a building to last for generations. So we dreamt really big, but I will tell you, the reality of the Smith Center is better than any dream I ever had. It is outperformed in every way, acoustically, operationally, just everything about it. I couldn't be happier with that design team that I described earlier, and their work, and how the public has adopted the Smith Center as theirs. The story that I hear all the time that I like more than any other story is, the Smith Center has been such an important part of our lives that we don't remember a time that we didn't have the Smith Center.
That's a good one.
We've only been open for 8 years, but that makes you feel really good. Now, are there things that we still want to do? Absolutely. I mean, the truth is, up until February of this year, life was pretty good. Life right now at the Smith Center is tough. And we made the decision to go dark a little early in the process. And in fact, this week we furloughed 75% of our staff, which has kept me up at night an awful lot. And it's been an emotional experience for me. It's painful to see this group of people that has been called the dream team in arts management have to split up. And even those few that are sticking around are, for the most part, working from home and taking pay cuts. We're just getting through these tough times. And while we raised a lot of money to build the Smith Center, you don't see me kind of out asking people for money these days. But this is the time when I'm out talking to people saying, look, it costs money to run a dark building. We still have to pay the electric bills, and we still have security and engineering and people that we have to depend on, and we have no revenue coming in. And so we're on this road to recovery, this road to sustain, to reopen the Smith Center. And so we're asking people who are regular attendees and people who may not have been to the Smith Center yet to pitch in a couple of bucks and help us get to opening night. Once again, Donato, it's the most challenging, difficult, emotional experience I've ever gone through professionally. The fact that, I mean, you were supposed to be on stage here in the next couple of,
No, we would have had 2 more concerts, and it's the same with the Las Vegas Philharmonic. Does an orchestra exist when it's not on stage? Of course it exists. We have a wonderful staff, full-time staff, just like the Smith Center, who are working around the clock trying to re-envision what a philharmonic is
Yes.
during these times, and just to think that, well, they aren't doing anything at the moment. Well, of course, we're trying to reach out to our community, stay engaged like you, and what I love about the relationship we have now, the Las Vegas Philharmonic and the Smith Center, but more importantly, what you, Lacey, and I, Jerry, all of our cultural leaders, we have this bond, and we have what kept you in Las Vegas all those years ago, and what I so love, so dear to us, is that we have this family of people that love the arts, either through their support or through how they engage with it. And of course, the Smith Center is the home for where we present this incredible art form. In my case, these wonderful symphonies, and in your case, how you've done such a wonderful job of presenting all of the things that happen at the Smith Center. It's so special. So
we miss you. We miss you. It breaks my heart that we're not doing Las Vegas Philharmonic concerts. And by the way, you're right. Jerry and the whole team there is terrific, as are our dear friends at the Nevada Ballet Theater, who we also miss. Beth is having to deal with these same things that you and I are dealing with. But listen, Nashville Symphony, as you know, announced a week ago that they are closed completely until July of 2021.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it all depends on each community's arts organizations have to deal with this current situation in its own particular way. But what I am so inspired by are our communities, Las Vegas community's response to keeping our art forms alive. With the Smith Center, with the Las Vegas Philharmonic, with the Nevada Ballet, and with all of the other incredible avenues and artist organizations, it's going to survive. While it's tough right now, I am so confident, so optimistic for the future. Oddly, not oddly actually, but
no, I'm totally with you. I just think, so many of us are pushing to let's just find an angle. Let's find a way to get around what the governor's saying, or let's find a way to perform, even if it's to plants.
Nice mention to Barcelona. Yes.
Thank you. But what people don't realize is that there were stagehands and there were camera operators and there were other people in that room. And we're taking the very conservative approach. And so my pledge to you is that the Las Vegas Philharmonic is going to be back in Reynolds Hall. And when that time comes, we will have found new ways to disinfect and to sanitize and to do all kinds of things that maybe we didn't even think about as carefully as we are today. But we're going to rethink a lot of things operationally to make certain that your home in Las Vegas is even better than ever.
Well, I am personally so thankful that you've joined us for this hour. As I suspected, we will continue this for hours to come offline. But what you've shared with us today it's so special to hear your journey to where you are today, and we're so thankful that you have stayed in this community, that you have been such a leader, and to show it through your commitment. An incredible building was built, and that is my just eternal thanks to you, Myron, and thank you.
It was a group effort, and we have a lot of people to thank. But the reason why we exist is so that we can present great music and theater and dance to a wonderful community.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this hour. It's been a very special hour, very meaningful. And thank you, Myron, again. And until we see each other in person, it can't happen soon enough. Thank you.
Cheers.